many people are aware of, like the Pepe the Frog alt-righters and Richard Spencer, neo-fascist, and the KKK. But can you talk about some of the more obscure and less well-known strains of fascist thought?
Sure, sure. I think what people don't realize a lot, the alt-right and the Pepe memes and things like that, is that they actually are tied in certain ways to the less known strains of the far right. One of the things that has really dominated this movement that we're broadly calling the alt-right now, but really comes out of various strands of white nationalism from Europe and from other pseudo-intellectual spaces, is a focus on esoteric ideas, primarily what was called traditionalism, basically a political philosophy that saw the hierarchies of religions and the stratifications therein as sacred, and around kind of esoteric philosophers like Julius Evola. That, while kind of unknown to a lot of population, actually motivates a great deal of alt-right and neo-reactionary thought. At the same time, what I talk about in my book a lot is folkish heathenry, which is basically the revival of Nordic or Northern European pagan religions, but with a racial motivation. It kind of uses an old-fashioned interpretation of Carl Jung that archetypes, the gods of myth, are kind of baked into the psyches of white people, and that we have to kind of reclaim our natural way of understanding them. The purpose of these things, beyond being kind of esoteric and allowing people to jump into arcane volumes, is to give their ideology a sense of depth and to make it beyond politics. It's actually something spiritual and transcendental. That influences quite a bit of the alt-right, even if they don't always take it as literal or on its face value. Another kind of a sector of this are the very far right interpretations of Christianity, which are waning to a degree. One being Christian Identity, which is tied to a lot of kind of acts of spontaneous violence in the 80s and 90s. These are churches that do kind of, I guess, heretical readings of the Bible, see Jews as actually the spawn of Satan. People of color don't have souls, and they're actually animals that need to be controlled by white people. Another version of this is called kinism. It's, I guess, slightly less repulsive, but still being pretty disgusting. And where basically they think that in the Bible it sets down parameters for what a church should be, and it should be monoracial and should create separations between races. These have had a lot of influence for a long time, but as white nationalism kind of moves out of the countryside to a degree, it just become less influential. And frankly, Christianity is not in vogue in white nationalist communities in the way that it once was. And so a lot of these kind of more odd channels, like heathenry, like esoteric stuff, like occult interpretations, those are getting a lot more currency. I talk a little bit about neo-reaction. This is sort of like a cousin to the alt-right, really heavy in Silicon Valley. It's based around a few kind of obscure philosophers in the Silicon Valley scene, focusing really heavily on retracing monarchism, recentering traditional hierarchies, again, focusing on a very, racist pseudoscience, and really attacking democracy as a concept. And so what they're trying to do is recenter basically corporate elites as social elites in the same way. And this has just a ton of overlap with the alt-right, including the same figures and funding sources and things like that. And frankly, like, this is only growing. These kind of what we think of as the strange, weird fascists, in a lot of ways are the status quo fascists today, and they're only getting stranger. They're only getting weirder.
And there's actually a long history stretching all the way back to Nazi Germany of like this fascination with occultism. I know there's a podcast that I like. It's not political. It's more of a comedy podcast, but it studies conspiracy theories and like aliens and stuff. It's called Last Podcast on the Left, and they do this whole series on. You're familiar?
Oh yeah, definitely.
They do this whole sub-series on Nazi occultism, which is just, it's funny, it's an entertaining show, but it's also really informative. So I'd point people to go listen to that if they want to find more about the roots of occultism on the far right. But there's also like a huge infusion of conspiratorial thinking, and there always has been on the far right in the U.S., but certainly InfoWars and people like Alex Jones perpetuate this conspiratorial thinking. So what role does that like sort of conspiracy thinking play on the alt-right today?
You have to have it on some level. It's impossible to have fascist ideas without some kind of sense of conspiracy. There's a few primary things, right? The most obvious is anti-Semitic conspiracy theories about Jews controlling finance, the media, social systems, whatever. Usually it's whatever the enemy of the day is. Jews control it, according to them. That's the most obvious version of it. But in reality, it's all baked into conspiratorial worldview at its very basic core. You know, what fascists believe is that human beings are fundamentally unequal. They disregard 99% of modern science, of our understanding of technology, of social history, almost all of it, and then replace it with their own version. And for their version to be true, there has to be mass conspiracies, basically hiding us from the reality of the world. A really good example is a focus on Egypt. And there's a lot of focus from white supremacists on Egypt and trying to prove that ancient Egyptians were actually Europeans. Now, there's no evidence that's actually accepted amongst anthropologists that that's true. It's just factually untrue. Yeah, if I was to Google search right now, I would find dozens, maybe hundreds of white supremacist websites proving the linkages, showing falsified documents, saying that governments covered things up. It requires a mass global infrastructure of conspiracy to make what they think true. The same is true of race and IQ arguments. This stuff has been discredited for 70 years now, yet they keep drumming it up and saying that, colleges, government institutions, media figures are hiding the truth about race differences in intelligence. These are fundamentally untrue things, but it requires a conspiratorial worldview. I think with something like Alex Jones is he may drop the obvious racial connotations to the conspiracy, but he maintains the conspiracy infrastructure itself. So, and we see this a lot in conspiracy circles that try and claim that they're non-racist. They'll essentially take an anti-Semitic conspiracy, change Jews to bankers or to Rothschilds or something like that, and continue the same logic, that there's a cabal of people who use crypsis to control things for their interests and not our own. What it does is it stops us from looking at social systems. It's not capitalism. It's these people, right? If only these people were gone, we could take care of capitalism ourselves. But it also essentially keeps that mind going that there's always some kind of secret group that's not just, for example, a capitalist class, but it is some other group that has some other interests that control things. And frankly, as distrust in dominant institutions continues for obvious and correct reasons, conspiracy theories feed even bigger. And we see this anytime there's actually a resurgence of like left populism that's driven into organizing. Conspiracy theories also grow.